Welcome, everyone. Let's just give other participants a few minutes. I think there are just a few of us here on the live Zoom audience, which is actually good. But we will be live streaming this in a second on Facebook. So I'm going to go live on my Facebook page, and I'll share the link also with the people. Yeah, and I think I shared the live stream link on the chat. We'll start in 1 minute. So sige, I think we can kick off. No, it's going to be live streamed on Facebook anyway, and I'll be uploading this webinar on my soon to be announced YouTube channel. So let's see if it works. So thank you everyone for joining. This is episode 0 of AI for Lunch. Sorry, I haven't thought of a creative name. Basically, we're just going to cover a broad swath of topics today just to kick it off and see what the response of people will be. I want to start with this image from an AI image generator. I think it perfectly captures kind of the mood of a lot of people about AI. It seems like AI is transformed just in the last few months into something that's evoking both wonder and fear. And it seems like there are many horizons available to us, but at the same time, there are also risks. I noticed some of you mentioned the concerns about AI. So we'll talk about that then. Oh, may reaction agad. Better AI for lunch than us being eaten by AI for lunch. Yeah, baka nga. It's AI for lunch is better than humans for lunch. Now, one thing that that's really still blowing my mind today is this image is actually the product of a prompt, And of course, I'm not the religious type, but I sometimes mention to people, doesn't this give you another another perspective on John verse 1, which is in the beginning was the word, and after the word, became everything, basically the universe. So we're seeing that happen in the AI landscape. Everything is being reduced to words. And it's interesting because linguistics and graphics have always been different silos. So it's interesting how this will affect how images are appreciated over time. Mamaya, I'll talk about art. We might have people also joining us who come from outside the Philippines. Welcome. Most of the stuff we will discuss in this series will be obviously based from a Philippine context, but a lot of the developments in AI are actually international. So it's interesting how what's happening in Silicon Valley has a direct effect on the Philippines. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Dominic Ligot. I'm called Doc. That's actually my name. It's not a title. Although, sometimes I don't correct people anymore because I get dragged to too many events with doctors. But anyway, I'm a data analyst. I'm an entrepreneur. My professional background started in finance. So I worked in banks and investment companies for almost 14 years, and then later went into IT. Nowadays, I split my time between 3 organizations, or maybe 4. I founded a company called Cyrolytics, And our focus now is on designing use cases for AI. So a little bit about that work I'll talk about later. Some of you may have learned about data ethics, which is started out as an online advocacy, and now it's closer to a nonprofit media company where we put out content about anything related to data, the ethical side of data. And then I also teach. So I, along with some colleagues, co-authored the master's degree in business analytics in the University of Asia Pacific. I also co-founded with some colleagues the Analytics Association of the Philippines. I think I have at least one colleague here, Sherwin, and we were behind Project Sparta, which is has been renewed. I heard for a couple of years. It's a nationwide data training program. And as an AI practitioner, I've been in data for more than 20 years, but as an AI practitioner, I'd say closer to maybe a little under 7 years or maybe 8 years. One of the, I think one of the most publicized uses of AI that I was involved in was in the NASA Space Apps Challenge, where we used computer vision, satellite data, and language processing for social media to address dengue outbreaks. A lot of the work I've been doing recently has been actually in the humanitarian space. You might be wondering what this thing on the left is. So this is my first home computer, or at least a picture of it. I started coding at the tender age of 6 as a toy. I never had any formal training in coding. It was easy. It was just either for fun or as part of the job. And I say that with a lot of humility, but also to kind of encourage people who may not have a background in computer science or may not have a background in anything technical. You don't have to be, actually. You can use me as an example. And moving forward, as I'll describe later, in the developments about AI, this is going to be more the case where it will challenge our assumptions on what it takes to become an AI practitioner. So more on that later. So why am I doing this? So honestly, this was maybe 50% spur of the moment out of a lot of conversations with people, and I've been invited to talk in numerous fora. It seems obviously AI is the big thing. A few years ago, people rarely talked about it, but now I think it's the right time to talk about AI on a broader scale. I wanted something equally ingestible or digestible by technical and non-technical people, because I think up until recently, when you say AI, it's something very academic, very technical. But I think AI is now affecting lives, even non-technical lives. So we need to talk about it. I also want to spur more discussions about practical uses of AI, because most of the recent discussions on AI have been on kind of the entertainment side, like images, chatbots. Well, how do we use it for our daily life? How do we use it for business, diba? Let's talk about that. Lastly, I want to also address the alarmist claims. I'm not saying we shouldn't be alarmed. Certainly, there are things to worry about, but there's also disinformation about AI, and I'm big in the a large part of my involvements also involve disinformation, how to fight it. And AI is going to be, as early as now, both the cause and potentially the solution to disinformation. So it's good to talk about it. But there's also disinformation about AI itself. So I think we better get on top of this. Yun lang naman. That was my intention. Whether this translates to something I do for my business later on, wala pa. I haven't even thought about that yet. Although certainly there are opportunities. So consider this a public service, and this will continue to be free. I'm planning at least 5 episodes, including 0. So after 0, there'll be at least 4. And then I'd be happy to hear from the crowd, even online, suggestions on what you want to dive into. So it's just so much topics to talk about. Okay, so who's watching this? So when I put out the invite, there were at least 40 people who registered. Obviously, not everyone showed up. But majority, I would say 40% come from industry. And the next biggest chunk have read about it online. So that's important to remember. So if you haven't used AI in your work, you've actually heard about it online. That's good. And also that's bad, because not everything you see online could be reliable. So hopefully with this series, we help everyone come to the same page. And then the close third would be people who don't know much. That's why I'm here. As a number of people have seen it in movies or documentaries. Um, Only 2% actually come from academia, which I don't know if that's disappointing or not. Well, they don't need to know about AI because they teach it. But it would be nice to hear from the academics also. I made a point about this in a recent talk sa DICT. It's like our academic sector is taking time to ingest AI. That's just my impression. Maybe I'm just ahead, but in a few months, I hope to hear more from our professors and experts. And then on here on the right are what people stated their industry comes from. So a lot come from government, which is interesting, advertising, marketing, high tech, consulting. So I would take most of the people listening now, or those who signed up, are probably people who are planning to use AI for work, which is good. In terms of concerns, it's not a very good visualization, pero what do we find? Productivity is big, automation is big, efficiency. So it sounds like work. People want to use it for work. And that's actually a healthy attitude, because if you want to get right down to it, ultimately what will drive AI adoption is if people can become productive with it. Of course, there are fears about jobs, but as Sam Altman, who recently testified in the US Congress, said, there are a lot more jobs that are on the other side of this AI phenomena than there are on before AI. And then he also made the point that there are many jobs today that didn't exist back in, let's say, the 40s. So we should always have this optimistic, counterintuitive, but optimistic attitude that technology creates more opportunities. But we also definitely have to be wary of those jobs that are potentially displaceable. So this is I always start my talk with this. So this is the starting position for everyone about AI, and where we want to be is the smart black dude on the right. So hopefully I fulfill that promise, at least for episode 0. And then apologies in advance. There's just too many things to talk about, and I've already burned 15 minutes with the intro. So this is really meant to be a long drawn conversation, and I want it to be interactive. So my presentation won't take an hour, maybe about half an hour after this. And then the remainder of the time, if you're still around, hopefully I'll get comments or questions we can maybe park for the next session. Okay, so let's deep dive. It's a rabbit hole, as I always say. I'll divide the presentation into 6 parts. First, ano ba yung AI talaga? And there are many competing definitions. So we'll try to get to a working definition very quickly. Then I'll go through kind of the 4 main topics that I plan to do a webinar on. Let's discuss jobs first, then the art and education scene. Let's talk about use cases and tools, or at least a framework for it. And then end with usually the exciting stuff, which is the ethics and the regulatory part. And then what to expect moving forward. Okay, so let's get to it. What is AI? Okay, if you search online, if not ChatGPT, I would say you would get bombarded by death by Venn diagrams. Now, this has been the case since the dawn of the data science trend pa, no, 2012. And the reason for this is, well, number one, it can get very confusing. But second, if you really zoom out and appreciate it, this just suggests that AI has a tendency to affect many things. It involves many fields, and it's often I would say misclassified with machine learning or deep learning. I think the first thing we need to remember, you can probably treat AI as a broad field of practice, but then everything else you hear, like machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, these are methods or approaches to doing AI work, if that helps. There's also competing fields like analytics, business intelligence. Like when we formed the Analytics Association of the Philippines, we were adamant that AI and analytics were 2 different things. I'm actually softening up to the potential reality that those fields will merge. I think the question na lang is, what is the focus of analytics versus the focus of AI? One thing to think about is AI, as we talk about it today, is actually the convergence of many fields. So machine learning, NLP, expert systems, these used to be very distinct practice areas in computer science, and now they're being lumped together under AI. I think that's both a good and a bad thing. It's good because there are methods and practices that are cross disciplinary. Later, when I talk about algorithms, you'll see this. But at the same time, it could be bad because AI could be inheriting a lot of bad habits. The same phenomena happened with data science before. No? Parang data science also amalgamated a lot of other practices, and now it's just known as one generic term. And then very recently, data engineering came out. Also, convergence of many fields like database management, ETL, etc. So I won't get into too many of those details, but I guess it's enough for you to realize that potentially part of the confusion we have today, I think it's temporary, is that many experts from many fields are now working together in AI. Okay, so ano ba yung AI? So probably one of the best things you can do is ask AI what AI is. So this is the answer I got. No? In simple terms, AI refers to the development of computer systems that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. I see this definition a lot. I think it's helpful because this helps distinguish AI from other tasks which actually may use similar methods. For example, report generation, business intelligence, analytics. Well, certainly those require human intelligence, but it's in those cases, like in analytics, the emphasis is on the insight and the human element, while AI seems to skew more towards independent machine intelligence. So that's a fine distinction. And then the second sentence, it involves creating machines or software programs that can learn, reason, and make decisions based on data. So if you think about it, ganyan din naman yung analytics eh. But the emphasis on analytics is empowering people, while the emphasis in AI is actually making machines more capable. So I know that doesn't necessarily resolve a lot of debates, but at least for the remainder of this series, we'll use this. So when we talk about AI, we will skew towards what machines can do, which is still obviously the result of human input, but the emphasis is on the machine, as opposed to business intelligence, analytics, where it skews towards the humans. I think that's one way of distinguishing it. Okay, so one thing I want to also raise, this is a tweet I did about a year ago. Time has passed na since this tweet. Again, every time people mention AI, we're talking about machine learning, no? Lalo na in academia, but very rarely about machine doing. When we say machine doing, what was the algorithm used for, or what kind of products or systems were put in place? I think this is a gap that needs to be filled, because when we talk about a lot of the ethical and regulatory problems, it's all about what the machine did. Like a self-driving car ran over a person. We're not debating anymore what computer vision process made the car move on its own, or why did the computer vision process not detect a human quickly enough. It's the fact that we have a self-contained automated system that didn't involve humans, but actually resulted in damage to humans. I think, and that's just one issue. So I would rather err on the side of being more balanced. We're not just talking about building AI. We now need to talk about the use of the AI. And that will also affect our discussion on jobs, because I think I'm already of the position that the people who will be using AI will not be necessarily people building AI. And that has a massive impact on skills and how people kind of interact with AI systems. Okay, you'll hear the term generative AI a lot. I want to touch on it briefly because the practice of AI is not new. It's been around for a while. Algorithms that lead to AI have been around for at least 100 years, no? If you talk about linear regression. But I think the big change, at least the emphasis, is up until recently, most AI applications have been on the discriminative approach, while now the excitement is on the generative approach. What does that mean? When you say discriminative, these are uses of AI that take let's say a data point or input, and then the AI algorithm will give you some sort of a decision or some sort of a maybe a prediction or a forecast. Like, for example, you can feed photos to a discriminative AI algorithm, and maybe it's a way of classifying a photo as a cat or not a cat. So that's one approach. While the generative approach works differently. You can give a generative AI prompt or a photo, and what it will do is it will create examples of data. So discriminative gives you an outcome, a result, a decision, while generative AI actually generates more data, kaya generative ang tawag. So let's use those convenient categories. To be frank, there have been generative AI long time, in the past. And maybe when we deep dive on the either the ethics or the use cases, we can run through the timetable of how these algorithms have developed. Maybe not today, because that will take a lot of time. So I think it's enough to at least be aware when we say generative AI, this is what most people mean. Either you're generating faces, deep fakes, for example, or you're doing image generation from a prompt like some Mid-Journey, Stable Diffusion, or I think the most popular now is the conversations, the chatbots. And again, chatbots have been around for a while, but generative AI in a chatbot is an interesting innovation because chatbots in the past were rule-based, mga if-then statements. So like chatbots on Facebook, you can build one. You basically have to build parang a conversation tree. A human being will need to do that. While in a generative AI sense, you don't need to do that. Generative AI is smart enough to build an answer based on your prompt or your question. And I think this is really the big innovation, no, that has happened in the recent months alone. No? So ito may question na tayo which I'll address later. No? How can we reduce bias in AI? No? Sige, tama yan, Josh. If you guys have questions pala as I'm talking, just please drop it in the chat and we'll tackle it after my presentation. Okay, so what are popular AI practice areas? No? And this is not a comprehensive list, but I noticed there are at least 4 recurring parang areas where people are interested in, and they also overlap. First is insighting, which is actually very close to analytics and business intelligence. The generative AI algorithms are being used to identify patterns, trends, recommendation, data visualizations. But the main difference is the algorithms are doing it without humans. Parang all the humans have to do is ask a question, feed the data, and these generative AI are able to give human-like responses, which for me is mind-blowing. I have some examples later. Of course, computer vision is big. Anything that requires images and video, the image generation. I think there's now, I would probably lump here, kasi when you talk about audio and music, it's kind of a fusion between the computer vision and the language processing. So maybe that's in between. But between computer vision and language processing, I think easily 80 to 90% of the AI activities in this field. No? So natural language processing, this is where chatbots are, but also includes, I would say, older practice areas like topic analysis, sentiment analysis, speech to text. Like a friend of mine and I were experimenting with the speech API, which is part of the browser technology we've had for at least 10 or 20 years. Pero ngayon lang siya sumisikat ulit because you now have generative AI that can power the speech. And then robotic process automation. So I want to address a misnomer. When people say robotic, it has to be a physical robot. Certainly those are important and there are many advances in this field. But I think a bigger chunk of robotics actually refer to what I would call digital robots. So in a very simple example, think of them like Excel macros, no? Where you can record steps and then play it back. Pero an Excel macro is very static. So RPA includes AI that can help you automate tasks through certain software. And there, in other words, it's not a fixed set of tasks. So the AI will be smart enough to decide, how to, let's say, format a document, how to interpret data as part of a process flow. And this is actually the area where, in addition to natural language processing, potentially disrupts industries like call centers. Kasi nga, you don't need humans anymore to do a repetitive task. Okay, so The reason why I'm highlighting this is in case you are also looking to get into the AI field, uh, these are one of the first four areas I would look into. And then when you think about, I'd say, applications, like the dengue application that I mentioned that we did is actually a combination of several of these. We used computer vision to analyze satellite data, but we also used language processing to understand social media. And the outcome is a dashboard, which is data visualization for health practitioners. So something like that. No? I'll touch a bit on algorithms. I won't get to too much detail. We'll save that for another session. So the two probably state-of-the-art algorithms in use today, at least the most popular ones, is the GPT, or the Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and the diffusion model. They actually work kind of similarly from a conceptual standpoint, but they execute different things. When you talk about the chat GPT stuff, the text analysis stuff, you're probably referring to transformers. While if you're talking about image processing or image generation, you're probably talking about diffusions. They have similar components, like there's this thing called attention and embeddings. Again, I won't get into those details yet. But the one thing I want to highlight here is up until recently, if you looked at that diagram earlier where you had a lot of fields of practice, no, robotics, NLP, computer vision, they had very distinct algorithms. In other words, you might use, let's say, a recurrent neural network for text, but you might use a convolution neural network for vision. But what has happened is most of these fields have converged also on the algorithm. So you could use GPTs and diffusion models for the same applications. And what this has done is it's actually increased the pace at which people can innovate. Because if someone comes up with an innovation in computer vision, it can also be used in text. And that's massive because now you have a global community basically brainstorming on the same stuff. And that's the reason why the most recent developments in this space are improving at a breakneck pace because everyone's using similar frameworks and they're sharing it. A big part of this is open source. So the people who have released ChatGPT, for example, they are intent that the technology still be open source for good reasons. Okay, let's now dive into our first major topic, jobs. So according to the World Economic Forum, they released this job report for 2023, and it details the top 10 fastest growing and fastest declining jobs. This is not a forecast. This is what's happening now. So if we look at the fastest growing jobs, it's obviously anything that deals with data, machine learning, business intelligence, information security, but then you have things like sustainability specialists. Interesting, right? So these are people who probably work in the ESG field or are looking at sustainable development. At the same time, you have things like agricultural equipment operators and digital transformation specialists. So but the implication I'm seeing here is if you're not working in data, you're probably working in a field that uses data for, let's say, improvement or sustainability or development. While if you look at the declining jobs, daming clerks, no? And that's not, I think that's not necessarily saying bad things about clerical work, but this is classical clerical work, which is very manual, very analog. And now we're seeing those jobs are going away, perhaps because of automation. Meron din data entry clerk, which is part of the data value chain that we talk about in AAP. But those are going away very quickly. Why? Because a lot of data entry is actually manually labeling, let's say, pictures or objects. And if you train an algorithm to spot it using computer vision, there's a thing called self-supervised learning. The algorithm can train itself. And that's what's happening here. Door-to-door sales workers, news and street vendors, related workers. This is obviously kind of a no-brainer because most news is now served online and sales is also served via e-commerce. So wala na, there's no need for these people anymore. So again, it can be distressing if there is the prospect of your job being affected. But on the other hand, I would argue it doesn't take a lot to retool yourself to be AI driven or AI centric. So for all of these occupations, the natural reflex should be, okay, if AI is eating my job, how can I get jobs because of AI? Dapat ganun yung, I think that should be the attitude. Obviously, call centers are a big target. Actually, I was taking the Andrew Ng deep learning AI prompt engineering course. No, probably share that online. No? It's been around for at least several months, and one of the exercises was actually to create an automated call center agent. And I was saying, it doesn't get more obvious than that. And the reason for that is the way call center jobs are designed. Actually, they're very technology driven, but they're also very standardized. And that was part of the charm, no, of outsourcing to a call center. You allow them to standardize and streamline what would otherwise be a messy customer service workflow. But that also makes it highly prone to AI automation. Kasi gawa na lahat ng processes, you just rely on human beings to press buttons and pick up the phone. So they are actually at risk. But then on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will wipe out the call center population, overnight. In fact, many call center workers and owners I know are already incorporating AI into their BPOs. And I think that's what we will probably see in the near term. It's not massive job losses, but more of retooling of how BPOs function. And in fact, it's actually a political issue if call centers start laying off right and left, because they are bound by their agreements now with the regulators like PEZA. They have to maintain certain levels of headcount. So I think the trigger will really come from abroad. The companies outsourcing to the Philippines, because they're going to make a decision whether does it still make sense to pay a Philippine call center this much money when we can already automate. So the way to probably handle it is to meet the bull head on, no? And for the call centers themselves to suggest the automation, and then prove that you can take on more work without necessarily adding more people. So you can probably double your productivity, but just grow your workforce by 10%. So that's my view. Again, many things can still happen, but I think there's a lot of gloom and doom about this in the call center sector. I don't think it will happen tomorrow, but it's an opportunity actually for the call centers to step up. And then in terms of skills related, this also came from the World Economic Forum. Surprisingly, I think for me, creativity is one of the top skills. Of course, analytical thinking is there, but you see, creativity, resilience, motivation, these are not like hard skills, no? These are soft skills. And I don't know if it surprises you, but this flies in the face of kind of the sentiment that in the AI driven world, we need to always be talking about programming and, math, statistics. That actually doesn't even apply here. Maybe it's a subset of number one. When you say analytical thinking, maybe it does involve programming. But actually, because of the trend towards AI, there's a bigger, I would say, demand for soft skills. And the reason for this, in my view, is simple. Because we're now eliminating a lot of the robotic, inhuman tasks anyway. You now have more opportunity to be creative. The tools at your disposal, if you're a content creator or an artist or a writer, have increased. No? Technological literacy, I think that goes without saying. But all of these other things like empathy, leadership, you wouldn't necessarily associate with technology, no. But I think it's that you're removing a lot of, pardon the term, lower level jobs, which actually, if you think about it, humans shouldn't be doing in the first place, and then moving people up necessarily to higher level work. And that's both a philosophical thing and a kind of a tactical thing that we need to face. No? If you're working in HR, working in training, you now need to start thinking about this. How do we shift the focus? I think a friend of mine, si Peachy Paking, who runs Hyper Island, no? She made a good point about in any product development work, especially technology, easily 80% of the time is spent coding up the application, like programming it. And that can be very mechanical. But if you remove that or a portion of that, you actually unlock time that can be used for more discussions around user experience, around design, and I think that's that's important to think about. I want to also highlight this now. This is what I mentioned earlier, that we're getting to a point where the users of AI tech are not necessarily the builders of AI tech. And to illustrate it, these two things, one is an English prompt to ChatGPT, and this other thing on the right is code, no, on Python. They output exactly the same things. So if you reflect upon that and think about it deeply, many of the things that were previously strictly the province of programmers can now be delegated to non-programmers who can basically give instructions in English. At the same time, the people who are actually still in the programming, I don't think they will lose work to do. In fact, the work they will do will probably multiply because there'll be a higher demand for these systems to be optimized and tweaked, but will not stop people from using them. Kasi dati, kunyari, in the era of discriminative AI, you really needed to learn, let's say, Python or JavaScript and understand how these models work mathematically. And certainly that knowledge is still useful. But now with interfaces like chatbots and image generators, you don't need to do any mathematics to actually prompt a chatbot. Maybe if the subject matter is mathematical. And of course, the other issue there is sometimes the chatbots actually don't give you a factual response, which is another issue altogether. So I think we're close to getting to a point similar to, let's say, automobiles. No? If you have a car, the mechanics who know how the spark plugs, the oil, the transmission, all that stuff doesn't make them any better a driver, no? But they certainly know how to fix the car. Samantala, yung mga people who are driving, even professional drivers, Formula One drivers, can really make the car flip around and do really cool stunts. Doesn't necessarily mean they know how internal combustion engine works or how to tune up the car, although there's a very high overlap. So I think we're headed there already for AI. And then that's for me is very exciting because that means, again, more opportunities to be creative. I mean, certainly the high-tech skills are there. But let's face it, in the time you spent learning all of that programming, you could be learning other things. So it depends on where your persuasion is. If your persuasion is really the technology side, the mathematics side, continue doing that. But in terms of speculating how your product will be used by people, there's another type of professional for that. No? We heard terms like data translator or AI translator. So I think those are the new fields that will now be in demand because you can now prompt an AI to do something. Which brings us to this issue of, or not issue naman, it's a topic called prompt engineering. I think this is more of a short-term thing because now that you can prompt AI, ang labanan ngayon is how well you can prompt it. And it's basically writing very good sentences. So I think certainly it's an opportunity for people to get started quickly, just learn the basics of how to prompt. But then over time, I think the nearest development will be the AI itself will help you prompt AI. So this could be a short-lived thing. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But right now, it opened up the field that would have otherwise been occupied by programmers. And for people who just write English, you can prompt it. There are courses about this. I mentioned yung deep learning AI course, but you can also find a lot online. And the prompting for chatbots is a totally different, I would say, dimension to prompting an image generator. Like if you look closely at these prompts, some of them are counterintuitive. It's all about calling up inspirations from other artistic fields or mentioning a certain artist, copying them. That's actually created a problem in copyright regulation, which we can discuss briefly later. But this is a big skill, prompting, no? Prompting for images and prompting for chatbots, and eventually prompting for video. People who have already started creating video from prompts. So it really has elevated, as I said, the word. No? The word has become really, really important for people who want to be productive. Okay, then let's segue into art. No? Perfect segue. So the big deal now is that actually this has, before ChatGPT became a big deal. We've already had image generators now, like Mid Journey, Stable Diffusion, and there are variants already. Dolly is another. This is actually the same prompt used on several image generators. I think this one on the left is Stable Diffusion. This one on the right is could be Mid Journey or something, and then this one on the bottom right is Dolly. So that's actually one thing that's mind blowing. You can give three different AI generators the same instruction, and they may interpret it in a very different manner. No, but this has unlocked a lot of debate, but also a lot of opportunity for creatives and graphic designers. Because on the one hand, something that may have taken you forever, no, to process manually using Photoshop or taking photos can now be done with a single prompt. On the other hand, people are raising concerns, especially artists who feel that their work has been their copyrights have been infringed, because a lot of this work is inspired by existing work by artists. And a big debate now is whether prompting can be considered art, no? And that's actually a philosophical thing, because I love reminding people that back in the 1800s, ang 1800s talaga dami nangyayari noon, no? The Manure Crisis, and of course the colonial era ended. Pero in the art scene, the big debate then was photography. Can you imagine that? Photography wasn't considered art. And it wasn't until probably the mid 1900s where there was a massive acceptance now of photography. And the argument there was, even if you have a very good machine that can capture light, it's not the same as a painter with a brush. Diba? Parang, okay, but now you have photographers and technology using technology to create these images. And now it's gotten even more abstract. You don't even need the camera anymore. You just need a sentence. So I think if you follow the same trajectory, that debate will be resolved in the same direction, that prompting is an art form. Pero right now, ang daming mag-object dyan, no? Which leads us to this issue of copyright. This is the specific reference that I keep referring to. So I think this was in early this year, February or January. Getty Images, which is a popular repository of stock photos, no, which you have to pay for. They sued Stability AI, who created Stable Diffusion. And the reason is, it's very obvious that Stable Diffusion was trained on copyrighted images. Parang kitang-kita dito, even the logo of Getty Images appears, no, as an output. Although the layout, the photo, even the poses of the people are very different, pero it's very clear this was either copied from or inspired by a Getty Images photo. Now, the tricky part here is, does Getty Image have a right to sue? Because technically under copyright, most copyright law, and again, I'm not a copyright lawyer, but from what I understand, it actually has to be the exact same, basically, output if it's art or if it's writing. No? The original copyright goes to the author, but if somebody used it without your permission, you have the rights to enforce your copyright. Trademarks are slightly different. So baka dito sabit sila sa trademark because it's a registered logo, and something that looks very similar to a registered logo can be a grounds for IP, intellectual property suit. So this is like a $1.8 trillion lawsuit by Getty Images. And this is also putting to perspective regulations about or prospective regulations about copyright. Because on the one hand, yes, you have to protect the rights of artists on their logo, on their likeness. Parang sa deepfakes, if you get deepfaked by someone, it could also be grounds for cybercrime, like identity theft. But then on the other hand, how do you restrict or regulate it without stifling innovation? That's an issue. On the education front, similarly, the concern is with plagiarism, because now many academics are realizing, especially in research, that pretty much anyone can write research quality copy without them understanding it, no? And I don't think this is a resolved issue yet. There are some, I would say, progressive ideas. Like one common suggestion is, okay, why don't you just take the bull by the horns again and force the issue? Get your students to actually use ChatGPT in school, pero have them orally defend it or challenge it. I mean, those are certainly good suggestions. But I think the way curricula works right now, essays, dissertations, it's really highly at risk. And even attempts to automate detection, like this thing on the right is an AI text detection system. And this text I fed it came directly from ChatGPT. And it still said it's probably a human. So natatalo pa rin ng AI yung AI. Of course, future AI could be smarter. I think the bottom line here, if you ask me, is we now need to seriously evaluate how we teach children or how we teach ourselves. Because as it stands now, you have to spend at least 20 years in school to be productive. And if you take advanced degrees pa, like masters and PhDs, that's another 8 years. Uh, by the time you get out of school, the knowledge you learned at the start of school is probably outdated. We're teaching a lot of outdated stuff. And the reason for that is the time it takes to absorb it in a very manual manner is very long. So I think the challenge now is for schools to, embrace how this technology can quicken the delivery of information, but then spend more time basically understanding and reflecting it, less time on memorization. Again, that's just me thinking out loud. This is certainly something that needs to be discussed. And then I want to bring up that especially education, we haven't had a very good relationship with technological innovation. Like back in the 80s, long before most of us were aware of it, there was a move to ban calculators because it would destroy math. And then I remember there was a move to ban the internet. You can't use the internet. There was a move to ban Wikipedia, etc. No? And I guess none of those initiatives prospered. We continued going to school, notwithstanding the existence of Wikipedia. Even the validity of Wikipedia for a long time was questioned. It's not relevant. But what people are ended up doing was using Wikipedia as a guide, because Wikipedia has very good references and citations in general. You use Wikipedia to find those citations. I think that's certainly a relevant and good use of the technology. Pero I remember when the first time Wikipedia came out, even I was skeptical. Like, why would a free encyclopedia be better than like Britannica or Collier's, where you invested 50,000 pesos for a brand new set over 12 months? No? Be better than those people who are actually paid to get information. And I think the eventual conclusion was the virality of Wikipedia and how people fill it up far surpasses the research capability of any single encyclopedia. So, ang nangyari, they started integrating stuff from Britannica and Collier's into Wikipedia also. So, I think we will face a similar development here. And yeah, so there's some conversations happening in the chat. Tuloy nyo lang yan, no? We can address that later. Like a question on should it be called cheating, etc. I mean, there are philosophical sides, pro and con. We'll tackle that later. Okay, let's get to use cases naman. No? First things first, ChatGPT isn't the only game in town. Just like in the image generation, in the chatbots, there are competitors now to ChatGPT. So you have Bard, you have Bing Chat, which is available to anyone with a Windows computer. And there's a nonprofit organization called Hugging Face, which I'm a part of. I encourage you to sign up and be a member. What they do is they release open source models in a web interface so anyone can interact with it. And they released their version of ChatGPT, which is called Hugging Chat. They all perform similarly. I noticed si Bard is more polite than ChatGPT, but sometimes the information Bard has isn't as complete. Si Bing has citations, they incorporate it. And remember, Bing is by Microsoft, and Microsoft invested into OpenAI, so there's probably a good interaction between Bing and ChatGPT. And then your Hugging Chat is kind of the more, I would say, democratic use, because for all the others, you have to sign up somewhere, be a member. While in Hugging Chat, you just access the link and you have access to a chatbot. I can't say which one is better. I mean, I think try them all, and it will only get more democratic as more time passes. In fact, I'm actually looking forward to the day where we can deploy our own smaller, portable, large language model, because that's really where I think the opportunity is. Like for, let's say, a school Wouldn't you like your own chatbot that incorporates all of your school's research and materials, and then you can use that chatbot in class as opposed to yung broad chat GPT? The plugin space is also growing by leaps and bounds. So plugins are integrations with other software. I think this is very healthy because you might have a base chatbot like ChatGPT, but you can actually use the chatbot in many ways. So again, if you took that deep learning course, deep learning AI course, it actually shows you how to manipulate the inputs and the response of ChatGPT in order to incorporate it into like a process into your application, and that's what's happening here. If you have a chance to check out Wolfram, I highly recommend it. So see Wolfram, Stephen Wolfram is one of the big names in physics and mathematics. And he already had like a chatbot called Wolfram Alpha and Wolfram Mathematica long before these large language models came about. And instead of competing, what he did was, you can't beat them, join them. So the Wolfram plugin should allow you to access the Wolfram database from ChatGPT. And then this is an application I found recently that I'm very, very excited to use because I think it's closer to what large language models should be doing. One of the big problems or debates with large language models is occasionally they spout out incorrect information. And the reason for this is it doesn't function like a database. In other words, if you ask ChatGPT a question, it doesn't retrieve parang in a database like parang nag-query SQL query. It doesn't retrieve a record from memory. What it does is it builds the answer on the spot using text or sentence patterns derived from text that it learned. So the output of a chatbot is something that looks correct, humanly correct, but occasionally the facts are wrong. No? Now, when I encountered itong si Chat PDF, what it actually asks you to do is, what do you call this? Upload a PDF, and then you can chat with your PDF. And I find that actually is a really good use case because rather than risk the hallucination thing na sinasabi nila about ChatGPT, you use information that you already trust, like your PDF or your research paper. But then you can use the large language model to interrogate it. I think that's really fantastic. So what I've done with this, I uploaded a poem and now it's giving me advice based on the poem. I uploaded my CV and I started asking questions like, what kind of work would you give Dominic Ligot, or how would you interview him to ask about his experience? That's actually got massive implications for HR because it's already focusing lang on a small piece of information based on the PDF. So if you haven't tried Chat PDF yet, I highly recommend it. Okay, this is from another talk I gave about social impact, and we're close to the end already. We're near the 1 hour mark. This was a paper looking at the impact of research. In a nutshell, what this chart shows is if you look at research papers in these various fields and then assess them in terms of their use in these other areas like public opinion, quality of life, improvement in health, blah, 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 most of the impact of academic research is in academia. Basically, it's just used to create more research, but rarely does it affect all these other parang things or fields, no? And I bring this up because if we're not conscious, this is what will happen to AI. It will just be stuck in the world of academics or entertainment, but rarely be used for day-to-day life or business. And this has, kumbaga may precedent na to. It worked in research before. It should not be the case for AI today. And when we look at these areas like public opinion, quality of life, improvement of health, I can tell you, having worked in the humanitarian sector and gotten exposed to this was mind-blowing for me. Because if you look at, again, I'll generalize, you ask any run-of-the-mill, I don't know, AI enthusiast or data science practitioner who are working in the commercial field, and you ask them, okay, how much of your work can be used for sustainable development? There's at least maybe a 2-minute pause because they don't think about it every day. I had to reorient myself, no, because I was used to banking, finance, telecommunications, and then now I'm looking at solving a problem like dengue. Ang hirap, no? You could use the same methods and technologies, but the orientation is different. So I'm just putting this out there. When we start to discuss social impact in another session, this needs to be considered. At the same time, this is a slide I had in another talk about AI. We haven't seen enough discussion yet. Meron naman, a few people have started on what is the business impact of AI. And I think this is something that's equally shared by analytics and of course, analytics and data science have been around a little longer. So marami na mga use cases, like the talks in the ICT, for example, talk about use cases. But I would personally be invested into showing people how to use AI for finance or for infrastructure or for brand or for market. Kasi that will really encourage adoption. So when I was interviewed recently, they asked me what's the state of the Philippines in terms of AI. And I said, it depends who you ask. If you ask the schools, they've been using AI for research for some time. No? But if you look at the government, apart from the AI roadmap that's already almost 2 years old, there's really rarely any discussion about AI yet, although some fora are emerging, except for the usual suspects like DOST, perhaps PhilSA. But most of the other departments, malayo pa yan. And then if you ask the private sector, it's weird. Maybe the biggest corporations, like I think Sina Aboitiz, Union Bank held an AI summit recently. They're talking about AI, but more for parang the prospects of adopting it. But when you look at the the MSME sector, wala. No one cares, I think. But then on the startup front, mayroong konti. Because these are people who are, the innovators ahead of the curve, they want to implement. So it's very spotty. And I think it's because we have to start talking about AI from a business perspective, as opposed to just looking at it for entertainment or talking about the risks. Finally, we're at the kind of the finish line now. So when we want to talk about ethics and regulation, one thing that I find interesting is that the clamor for regulating AI is actually starting in Silicon Valley, or at least kind of the US, which is a break in pattern from previous. No, like for example, in the social media era, parang the clamor was not to regulate social media, despite all of the ill effects. Or when you talk about blockchain, they were talking about replacing the regulatory system. No, let's remove all the money and move it to Bitcoin. Pero here, I would say the discussion is more nuanced. There's a lot of fear mongering for sure. Like itong si Jeff Hinton, he's like one of the original pioneers in machine learning and deep learning. And all of the luminaries, including Sam himself, were disciples of, or at least indirectly influenced by Jeff Hinton. And now he recently quit his job at Google just so he can talk about the dangers of AI. And that's interesting, no? At the same time, in more recent past, you've seen that there seems to be parang a marginalization of the ethics discussion. Like when Elon Musk took over Twitter, one of the first people he fired was the ethical AI team. Maybe, obviously, there are many angles to it, like they needed to save money. But it's interesting that for a social media company, the optics it gives, that you got rid of your ethical AI team is interesting. And then a bit further in the past, Dr. Gebru of Google was also fired by Google because she started talking about kind of abuses of AI technology. Again, it's a much deeper story, but these are the optics we've seen in the past. And then around the same time, I think 2021, the United Nations has started to put, some moves. It's not as wide scale as other initiatives yet, but there's been a move to adopt a global agreement on the ethics of AI. This is good. I recommend you look for the document. Just Google UNESCO AI ethics, and you'll find the recommendatory document defining ethics for AI. I think this is just the start. A lot of the moves to regulate AI actually draw inspiration from the UNESCO paper. I think when people were asking me about, for example, social media regulation, I think I said we need regulation that surpasses countries kasi the ability of a country to self-regulate, I think, is very hard when you talk about technologies that are driven by data. Like in social media, for example, the ability of social media to undermine democracy. Kitang-kita na eh. But can you trust a single government which may have benefited from that technology to regulate it? It's very hard. So I was saying you need the equivalent of something like the Geneva Convention on Weapons of Mass Destruction and Warfare. No? But again, the historical precedent for that is that thing occurred because we had World War One and Two, and we wanted to avoid more bloodshed. Even the formation of the UN itself, no, was driven by that. So, do we want to wait for a similar global Armageddon? Parang dapat wag, no? So that's kind of where the thinking is right now. I highly recommend you read the UNESCO paper. When we do the session on ethics, I'm going to deep dive on this. And then one of the big questions is this thing on alignment. This diagram is actually an analogy. It's the analogies for accuracy and precision. So you might have something that's highly accurate, kung nasa kanan, but it's not precise because the dots are all over the place. Or you can have something that's very precise, all your hits are in the same location, but it's not accurate because you're not hitting the bullseye. So it's a similar phenomena for generative AI because one characteristic, I'll just mention it, but we'll deep dive in another session. Of these generative AIs, they're known as autoregressive models, meaning every time you feed new data into it, it adjusts and learns, and it gets influenced by what you ask. So that can imply that the outcomes of any interaction with generative AI can be highly unpredictable. It can go into areas where you never thought it would. I think on a simpler example is you can look at the recommendation algorithm of YouTube. If you just keep viewing the recommended videos, eventually you start viewing videos that you never thought you would be interested in viewing. So ganun yun. This is known as emergent properties. You don't know how this system will interact with you. And that brings to question this alignment problem because most AI, we're used to just optimizing it for accuracy, for example. That's known as capability. But whether the output of the AI reflects the intentions of the creators or the users, yun yung alignment. And that's very tricky to measure. So in the session on ethics, I'll deep dive on that. At the same time, the uses of AI, ito yung sinasabi ko, building AI is one thing, the use of it is another. Particularly image generation. When you look at the implications on satire, disinformation are massive, no? Like these two examples are basically fake images. One was done for fun, and the other one was potentially done to mislead people, no? And think about the implications if you use this technology for identity theft, misrepresentation, paano na? And like even in this example, well, we don't have the rest of the post. It's not clearly marked whether this image is actually true or generated. And alam mo naman ng mga tao, they can easily get influenced by anything. Doesn't even have to be perfect. So itong nasa kanan, you notice this glove has 6 fingers. I mean, these are like minor issues, I think. The bottom line here is we tend to confuse the intent of something, especially if it's gotten no context. And that's dangerous, especially with disinformation. And then in the horizon, we actually have lawmakers proposing regulation already. So see Senator Marcos, she seems to be focusing on jobs. See Salceda is focusing on copyright. And then see Congressman Barbers is looking to create an AI regulatory agency. Now, all of these ideas are actually good. Nothing wrong with them. What's worrisome for me is if they're done without proper consultation and information. Basically, we're regulating out of ignorance. That's a problem. And we've seen already recent regulations that have gone astray, in terms of their intention. We don't want to repeat those mistakes. I want to highlight this recent initiative. I don't know if you can screenshot this, or maybe I can share the link during the Q&A. It's a new organization called the Ambit. I actually am part of it. They asked me to be a co-convener, and they came out very recently, easily within the last week, with a public petition on ethics, safety, and governance of AI. And it's a very good, comprehensive, short document. It's inspired by the UNESCO and other initiatives. And the idea here is for everyone to come together and proactively approach the regulatory situation rather than just wait for congressmen and senators to come up with it on their own. So I highly recommend you check out the Ambit. The link is here. And if you're interested to sign the petition, please do. But you can review it also as inspiration for ideas on regulation. Okay, looking forward. Ito na, tapos na tayo. Hopefully, we still have time for a bit of Q&A, no? It's already 1 o'clock. I ran a poll on the topics. Interesting how Twitter and LinkedIn reacted. So sa Twitter, jobs and ethics are the top hot buttons, no? Which makes sense. While on LinkedIn, business was number one, followed by jobs and ethics, and barely 4% wanted to talk about copyright. I mean, it's not to say people in LinkedIn don't care about copyright, but it's interesting, no? So the way it will probably roll out, we probably will talk about jobs or use cases first, and then ethics, and then art na yung huli. But we'll talk about everything. No? We won't miss a topic, just so you know. And I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage everyone, if you're not yet connected with me or following me, please do. After 12 years of hiatus, I finally went back to Facebook. I'm still debating whether that was a good idea. But the bottom line here is, I think this message needs to be spread. I don't think I'm the only person who will do this. There will be more. But at the very least, you can rely on me to be very, well, number one, very noisy about it. I want to make people aware, and I want to be in all platforms. I actually have an Instagram and a TikTok in backup. Wala pang laman. So if you want to follow me there too, okay lang. And of course, the YouTube channel will have this webinar in the future. So yeah, I'm looking forward to linking up with all of you. Okay, finally natapos. So that was my presentation in a nutshell. I will now open the floor. Actually, this call is up to 1:30, pero wala namang pressure for people if you want to hang around. Let's just go from top to bottom. So where we go? Okay. By the way, if you want to just raise your hand or speak up, okay lang. Josh Peralta, how can we reduce bias in AI since its capabilities and features are heavily reliant on the ones who created it? And if we want to be holistic, we have to be cautious. If you haven't read this article on Data is New Pollution by Mon Ibrahim, you should read it. He had a very good quotation there that bad algorithms are created by bad data, because algorithms are really meant to be biased. The question is the data reflecting reality? But actually, the data itself is the product of a process. So if you have a bad process, it will naturally create bad data. And if you have bad data, then you have bad algo. Pero yun nga, if you notice, any AI discussion rarely gets beyond, siguro at best, the data, like sa facial recognition, yung mga sample images. But the question is, what was the process that generated that data in the first place? And either that's too boring for the data and AI people to talk about, or more likely it involves other people like project managers, process managers, the Six Sigma people, the industrial engineers to come in and talk about it. Pero on that side of the fence naman, I'd say there's a bit of a reluctance because nga people are afraid to get into AI. So I think we really need to band together and talk about this common issue together. The issue of bias is reflected by, we have flawed processes that create flawed data. That's my view. NLP and large language models can be trained to answer FAQs. Yep, that's true. That's what's actually the near use case for BPOs. Parang the idea nga is to come up with a super agent. So tao pa rin, pero powered by AI, and they will be 10x more productive than a single agent. So in theory, they can take on more work without having to double the headcount. Now, whether that will eventually result in job losses, I think that's the fear. Si Sile, automation should save jobs while creating new opportunities. Yep, correct. AI lacks common sense, empathy, and listening. Okay, I'd be very careful by saying AI lacks empathy. Kasi it's important to question, how do we interpret empathy? Empathy is usually evidenced by communication. In other words, paano mo alam if robotic tong tao na to, doesn't talk to you or talks to you in a very robotic way? So you wouldn't know that unless you communicated with this person. Now, the way AI, lalo generative AI works, it's all about communication. So you could have AI that communicates like an empathic human. Does it really mean may empathy doon? I think that's the higher level debate. Like, for example, the proponents of another type of AI, yung symbolic AI, are saying these large language models don't really understand anything. They just give you statistically probable text. That's correct. But how humans interpret it and interact with it may not there may actually be no difference whether the AI actually understood the sentence or not, if it actually evokes a response from a human being. In fact, there was one case I didn't mention in the slides of someone who committed suicide because the interact hindi siya with ChatGPT, it's another chatbot, but the chatbot was so lifelike and convincing, the depressed yung tao killed himself. So would you be able to tell that person that, hey, look, the AI is not understanding what you're saying, it's just giving you words that it thinks you want to hear? Would that have made a difference to that person? Siguro yung tanong ano. Si Joseph, I don't know if he's still here. Sabi niya, Google Bard told it to make a screenplay, make an opening scene. Yep. It's really amazing how easily you can come up with essays, business plans. In fact, that's one of the use cases I will demonstrate in another session on business. I think that's really one area which anyone in a corporation or a business can benefit from, using AI to brainstorm. Prompt AI to prompt AI. Tama. Auto GPT, if you've heard of it, is exactly that. No? It's AI that can prompt itself. We can learn faster than before. I wonder how generative AI will address model hallucination and leakage. For me, one clue is how chat PDF works. In other words, you train an AI to interact with data that you can trust. Because if you just rely on the AI stock knowledge, there's really a risk that it will hallucinate. So I think future AI may work similarly to chat PDF, where you can connect it to a data set. Actually, you can do that now, but that's the design. As opposed to coming up with like portable models. Hirap kasi mag-train ng large language model. You need a lot of GPUs to do it. And a smaller large language model won't be as effective as itong mga GPT-4. That's why they're saying, I think si Sam Altman was saying, they're probably near the end of the road for large language models. As an architecture, there should be other architectures we should think about that are more portable. So yeah, of course, that's a space that we should watch and see. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Dizer said, should AI chatbot consider cheating? Be considered cheating. Sabi naman ni Sherwin, cheating implies there's competition. Education shouldn't be seen as competition. My view here is it's not necessarily the fault of the chatbot, but a problem with the curricula. So if the chatbot allows you to cheat on your essay, people will cheat on their essay. But what was the purpose of having the essay in the first place? Diba? You're supposed to be able to understand stock knowledge, interpret it, and argue with it. Lalo na if you're talking about social science, social studies, politics. It's not like math, where an answer to a solution is very mechanical or very deterministic. So if you judge it by that, I would actually see chatbots as a tool to improve the understanding of history. Like, I don't know how many of you will relate to this, but I understood and appreciated Noli Me Tangere when I read it in English. It's sad to say, no, but because nga, I grew up in a household that uses English more than Tagalog. So nung binasa ko siya in English, I appreciated the themes more than when I was trying to read it in raw Tagalog. Does that mean the Tagalog reading it in English was wrong? I don't know. But the curricula required it to be read in Filipino. So I mean, that should give you kind of a perspective on how to treat this. No? As Joseph said, he needed to go. Okay. Si Teresa, in DepEd, robotics is integrated in school curriculum along the implementation of special science. Yeah, can we consider this to be part of AI? Well, yeah, robotics is part of AI. I would say, general remark about schools and DepEd in general. If we're agreeing that our society now runs on data and artificial intelligence is important, let's just take that as a given, then certainly all our schools are outdated, because how many schools actually have an AI laboratory or if people wanted to experiment with data, how many of them have a super cluster or GPUs or even a decent PC, no? Diba recently there was a issue about laptops pa nga in DepEd. So for me, the optics of what schools are doing versus the intention, ang laki ng gap. And I don't think we will survive the era of AI if we cannot use AI within our schools. So if you use that as a very like a rule, how many of our schools are capable of using AI, not just teaching it, as in using it? I think 99% or close to 100% will fail that test. No, just food for thought. We actually talked to DepEd a lot and Shed, and we work with TESDA. Most of the discussions are about skills, pero nga very rarely about capability. And if we're going to rely only on the private schools for that, mahirap them because they don't have the capacity to produce enough students, much less teachers. We actually have a shortage of teachers. So yung problema. Yeah, Sherwin said, same sentiment with ISO. There are the Philippine national standards, but these are just suggestive, not regulating. Yeah, yun ang problema. If you say you want to regulate something, you need to a mechanism to enforce that regulation. Pero if you're going to force people to explore AI on their own, which is the current setup, go to GitHub, go to YouTube, I don't think you can regulate it that way. These are asks, is it possible to predict stock market and cryptocurrency using AI? Actually, trading algorithms have been around for a while. That was actually one of the first jobs I had, algorithmic trading. I think to a certain extent, it's not about predicting so much as it is about automating the trading decision. So if you have to buy, you wait for a certain price to buy or sell. But that was before generative AI. And one thing that generative AI has proven is that if you can reduce everything to patterns, then there's the ability to generate and predict those patterns. I think certainly there's going to be a lot of work in financial markets. Sabi nga ni Mon Ibrahim, not just financial markets, even casinos can be at risk. I can bet people will try that, but I haven't seen yet any applications there. See, dudes, how are you thinking about preparing for the advent of AGI? Okay. We didn't mention AGI. Siguro sa ethics session, we will. So, my view, and this can change very dramatically overnight, is that we're too worried about AGI than is warranted. Because AGI is basically AI that can do anything na. And it's either human level or above human level intelligence, yung ASI, super intelligence. Certainly, that's a possibility. And then if you look at the development of the large language models, exponential siya. So GPT-2 was light years ahead of GPT. GPT-3 was light years ahead of GPT-2. And then GPT-4 is now light years ahead of GPT-3. Will it get to AGI? It's hard to say. I think the issue there is right now these models operate on a very simple parang interaction. Basically, you ask it something and it will reply. For something to approach AGI, you have to go beyond question and answer. You have to be embodied, like connected to the internet. You should allow it the ability to influence things, maybe not just post stuff on social media, maybe operate the physical objects, and then baka later you get to that level. Pero right now, for me lang, I think people are too worried about AGI. We actually haven't figured out how to use the narrow AI properly yet. Just keep an eye on it. How far are we in terms of AI evolution? I just said that. I don't think we're there at AGI yet. The stuff that's close to that AGI is a field of AI called reinforcement learning, where you train an agent to operate within a system like a game, and then it becomes better than humans, like in chess or in case of AlphaGo. I think that's still limited kasi you have to give it specific rules and it will learn to maximize those rules. Ang AGI kasi, kahit walang rules, it should be able to learn. So I don't think we're there yet. I thought you appreciated Nolly when you watched GMA7's Maria Clara at Ibarra. I actually haven't watched it. I only see commercials. I think though, yung Maria Clara at Ibarra will be is an example. And I don't know this for a fact, no, but if you look at I forgot the name of the company. I think it's Dreamscape. They used to work a lot for ABS. They're now working for GMA. They're single-handedly
the source of many of the highest ranking teleseries in the recent past. So they're very, very creative, siguro, and they know the pulse of the audience. Now, think about, could an AI be that? No? Hyper productive content creation. I think it can. No? It's already happening now. Like yung recent news about that Drake person who published music that sounded like Drake. I think that's the opportunity. And then later it will really blur the lines between what is artificial and what is real. Tapos the people who are always criticizing, let's say, image generators for what do you call this? Copying. Well, it's not like artists don't copy from fellow artists, right? Or like I used to play the piano when I was a kid, was forced to learn it. One of the first things you learn in piano, apart from reading notes, is to work with chords and work with repeating patterns. So yung mga nakikita nyo nag-freestyle sa mga bar and, musicians, they're actually just repeating repetitive patterns. So on a very fundamental level, they're doing exactly what the AI has done. I think what's interesting now is because of this technology, you can do what musicians did for music, but apply it in art or painting or interior design. There's actually a really good AI called interior.ai, I think, or something. I'll look it up, where you just feed it a photo and it will design an interior concept for your bedroom or for your living room. Diba? So imagine the productivity saved for interior designers. No? JP said, compute resource can be solved with cloud computing, but it depends on the internet connectivity regarding schools having labs. I think there's two aspects to that. Certainly, there's the investment side. Because if you look at any school, easily, I don't know, 70% of their cost is the humans you spend on salaries, diba? But in terms of premises, it's not uncommon that your lalo na in public schools, if you've ever gone through public schools, the biggest problem there is the facilities. Hindi talaga na maintain, no? And I think that's part of their weakness, na lalo na when you invest in technology, hindi siya ma-maintain. So again, the question is to us, you want to train an AI literate workforce, you want to be competitive in the era of AI, but you can't maintain a decent computer lab, even a cloud. You have to decide. Otherwise, people will go to schools who can. Okay, I think we still have 7 more minutes. Are there other questions on the floor or anyone wants to raise their hand? Thank you for the live audience of 20 people, including myself. I think we will probably or it's live. This is being live streamed on Facebook now. We will post it on YouTube as well. If I can ask people to help us with feedback, and also if you want to have copies of the slides. So this is a bit.ly link, AI for Lunch 0. I'll also post it here sa chat. No? So just fill it up, give us feedback. We'll do this every time we do an episode. And then if you also have suggestions for topics, please do. And anyone who fills up the survey will email you the copy of the slide deck that we used today. Oh, may pahabol. Some comments on the Facebook. Ano nangyari sa Facebook? Teka, let's see. Kasi ako nakatutok sa Facebook. Maybe we should start making 3 rules of robotics. Okay. Yeah, that's so true. If you think about the rules of robotics, it was designed for in favor of humans, no? And I think ultimately that's where we should really be devoting our attention. Parang not replacing humans talaga. It's about augmenting humans. Dun talaga yung labanan, no, for this kind of technology. Doris, can we get a copy of the deck? Yeah, just fill up the survey that I posted on the chat or on the screen. Teka, let's bring it back so that people know where to look. Ayan, see bit.ly, AI for Lunch 0, and then you'll get a copy of the slides. What's your advice to people who pursue careers in tech since AI is very disruptive? Kaya pa ba ng brain cells? Yeah, absolutely. My first advice is wait for my webinar on jobs, which probably will follow in a week or so. We'll really deep dive into the career of AI. And remember what I said earlier, I think we're already at a point where the user of an AI is not the builder. So baka yung sinasabi mong brain cell problem, yung mga builders, no? And certainly, masakit talaga sa ulo yun. But the uses of AI doesn't even require programming. So that's food for thought. No? Technology is too fast. It's always been that way naman eh. I think ultimately it comes back to human beings. No? How do we use technologies? In fact, when we talk about the jobs, many things we take for granted now. Like a computer used to be a person. Yung network switch, mga modem, that used to be a switchboard operator. Okay, and ano pa ba? Encyclopedia salesman used to be all over the place. That was a very good lucrative career kasi how can people say no to knowledge, no? Instant sale yan. Better than insurance, better than car salesman, better than real estate. Pero yun na nga, when Wikipedia came, dead. No? That business went south. Okay, so we're down to 4 minutes. If there's nothing else, I want to thank everyone for patronizing episode 0. I don't really promote this session. It was more of a practice run. But at least now you kind of know what you're getting into. There'll be 4 more episodes. Probably the next one will be jobs, followed by use cases, and then ethics, and then art. We'll try to do this regularly. So probably Friday lunch is a good time slot. And then please, if you have ideas on other deep dives, let me know. Some of you might also be interested in joining kind of a study group on something where I'm working with AAP on. And of course, kanina I showed the ambit petition. No? Please, if you want to express your thoughts about AI regulation, please consider signing the petition or even volunteering for the ambit. No? Yeah, how can you contact me? You can contact me on Facebook. So I'll put my Facebook here. It's facebook.com/docligotai. No? And then on Twitter, everything else it's docligot lang. Twitter.com, docligot, LinkedIn, docligot. Nasa TikTok din ako. I'm both excited and dreading the prospect of being on TikTok, Instagram also Doc Ligot, and then YouTube Doc Ligot. No? So yeah, let's figure this out together and let's make it fun for everyone. No, bawal lang ano dito. Like I recently had a Twitter thread on smart shaming, which I will also talk about on video. Yeah, let's not fall into that trap. Yeah, I mean, let's make AI accessible to everyone. No? Sige, guest si Ai. Oh, actually, if anyone knows si Ai, the comedian, baka nga we might have her join a webinar. No? That would be awesome. No? Okay, sige. Thanks a lot, everyone. So that's been our inaugural episode. I hope you enjoyed. In the meantime, enjoy your weekends, and I hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much.